us don't care. We'll go home and sign off the air.
All right, we just thought because of the condition of the holidays that this was an appropriate song to start out with. So great to be here. Thank you very much. We are in a very special episode number. What is the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything? That should give you an idea. 42, our guest just signed to me. So 42 is the number of the shows that we've done since we got started. We were told we'd never make it this far, that the authorities would shut us down, the haters would hate, the trolls would troll, and we wouldn't be here. But we're here at a very good time of the year, a very festive time of the year, and we're here to talk about a great subject, which we'll get into in just a minute. But before we get that started, I want to acknowledge our good friend Mark Giuliani, who's here with us today. Mark is waving to us right now. And my very good producer and cohort, Mr. Alexander Knight. Alexander, how are you?
Good to be here. I'm excited to geek out on mic audio today. This is the last Angry DJ episode 42. Thanks to everyone for being here. This is the show where we interview luminaries in the world of broadcast, everyone from DJs to independent radio station owners to salespeople, you name it. We talk about it. And also we talk about podcasts and YouTube. So I like to think that this is the show that intersects old media versus new media, which is always a recurring theme. And I'm excited about today's guest, so I'm going to pass it back to Mitch.
Are you referring to me as old media?
100%.
Really?
Is that not obvious?
I guess so. I am the old guy. I do. I used to play the record. I lose my voice. Here, I'm going to expire. I'm going to stroke out right on the show. But anyhow, yeah, that's the uniqueness of this. And I agree. I think mics are a great thing to talk about because if you're in broadcasting, your mic is your axe. It's your thing that you use to make your voice sound so good. And we have a quality guy here to talk to us, Derek Bargaehr from Vanguard Audio. Derek, welcome as our guest. He's an expert. He's a CEO of Vanguard Audio. He's a guy that repairs microphones, really old ones like my Neumann that's hanging behind me. Derek, please say hi to the folks and tell us a little bit what you do on a regular day.
Yeah, I don't know if I have regular days anymore. But I did notice that Alex referred to luminaries, having on luminaries of a broadcast. I think I'm bringing that down more than a few pegs, but I appreciate you having me on anyway.
Well, you're an expert.
I suppose I have to think about that about myself that way sometimes. But yeah, my regular day is I make microphones for this company whose t-shirt I'm shamelessly wearing. I'm the CEO of Vanguard Audio Labs. And then I also repair mics on the side, as Mitch mentioned. Doing he said Neumann U87s, 414 ULSs. I just had a couple of Neumann SM2s and an AKG C24 through. That was a little bit stressful because that's about 60 grand worth of microphones, just casually digging through those and finding out what's wrong. I try not to think about that too much or it really stresses me out. But yeah, I fix microphones, I design microphones, I modify microphones. I've been a mic guy for as long as I've been into music and audio engineering, so it just kind of fits.
What's that microphone right in front of you there? It looks like a classic design. And by the way, all the classic designs, the older that you get, the more Art Deco-y those microphones seem. But anyhow, what do you have there right in front of you? It sounds great.
Yeah, this is actually one of the Vanguard mics. This is the Vanguard V1. This is the Generation 1. The Generation 2 is coming out actually quite shortly. And it has the lollipop capsule on it. So it comes with 4 capsules and an optional 5th capsule. It's got 4 of the small capsules. I'll try and open this up quietly so we don't blow anybody's subwoofer out. 4 of the small capsules, this is a standard small diaphragm, like 22 millimeter diameter of the casing and all that. And it comes with 4 of those, and then it comes with a 5th capsule that's optional, which turns it into a large diaphragm side address microphone instead. And that's what I'm using for the show because it was on hand. So
is that
this
a condenser mic? Yeah, yes. I was just going to say.
Yeah, it is a studio condenser. We only make condensers at this point. We have some plans, designs, as you will, on other microphones, but those are on the horizon at this point.
So do you think, obviously at some point in your life, you started taking these mics apart? Maybe you were prepared to put it back together again. Like when I was a kid, I used to take stuff apart. I didn't worry about putting that watch together, back together. I would take it apart and see how it worked, and then it's like, well, I can't figure out how to get all this all worked together. But Is that how you got started? Operating, doing autopsies on microphones, see how they work?
Yeah, a little bit, honestly. What you said about taking stuff together when you were a kid and not knowing how to put it back together, that's precisely how I started tinkering as a kid. I was always interested in how everything worked, whether or not it was important in the house or expensive or whether or not I could put it back together. My parents loved that about me. But they kept me around anyway for some reason. I got into music in I think late junior high, like everybody else. Friends started a band. They needed a bassist. I learned how to play the bass, and I kind of got into the tinkering through that as well, where I was modifying guitar pedals to set for bass frequencies, because back then they didn't really have a lot of bass pedals, and so instead of like actually practicing and being good at my instrument, which I still am not, I was tinkering instead to make my bass sound cool like guitarists did. So eventually I went to music school, got there and said, well, everybody else is better at this than I am. This is not a good sign for me, and I do not have the willpower to woodshed for 8 to 10 hours a day to get as good as they are. So I started audio engineering and producing instead, and recording. And while I was doing that, I was fixing my friends and fellow students' gear, and then my professor's gear. Worked on a Jupiter 8, the old Roland Jupiter 8 synthesizer.
Wait a minute. Jupiter 8, isn't that the name of the Lost in Space vehicle?
It might be, but
okay, they share
it's also a very famous, the JP8's a very famous and expensive synthesizer from back in the day. So I then needed to intern to get out of school, didn't want to scrub toilets at a studio, ended up interning for a microphone company, and kind of went from there, worked for them for 5 years. And then my old boss was Ken Avant, and he started the Avantone line of microphones. The defecation hit the oscillation at that particular company, so he and I started this one together. So that was in 2013 when we officially started, which is crazy to say out loud.
So your love of microphones, taking them apart, seeing how they work, allowed you to be acquainted with the key parts that make it work, and being a musician allows you to have those golden ears, so you know what it is that you're working on. Being able to design a microphone from scratch at Vanguard, as I was looking over your website, it's not quite a tribute company, and it's not quite a reproduction. There are other people that do that. Looks like you're making mics on their own level. In other words, for different purposes. Is that how you're doing it? I mean, how do you make a decision what you're going to build or create? Because you've got a bunch of them.
Yeah, I mean, what you hit the nail on the head. There's enough people doing clones. They do it pretty well. And it also, the ones that aren't doing it well, it's a race to the bottom, right? Can I make it $50 cheaper than the last guy and pretend it's totally a U87, wink, wink? That's such a fraught game because, as you know, with that U87 behind you, there were many, many versions of it in different years of and I'm just using the U87 as one example. In different years, they were using different parts depending on what was available on different runs. And the technology was such that there was so much variance, not only in the electronic components, but in the capsules themselves, that they could sound remarkably different. One serial number to the next could be 6 decibels, output difference. So that's where the idea of match pairs came from, is that they had to actually match up because back then the components and the machining just wasn't as good. Now, what they did with it was a miracle, classic German engineering. They made some incredible mics that still sound great today. But in my opinion, who did a U87 really well was Neumann. And I have no interest in trying to copy Neumann and say, look, I'm the U87 that ever 87. And I'm like, well, let's put a new color on the palette instead of giving you another shade of green or another shade of red. And there's 150 shades already out there on the market. I'm like, oh, let's give you an orange or a purple, or I'd rather do something new. Now, ultimately, we stand on the shoulders of giants like guys like Neumann and the folks at AKG and the folks at WFIL. They really, pushed the ball forward, and you stand on the shoulders of giants, but I want to take that and take it to the next level as a community, musicians in particular. I don't know how podcasts are. I deal more with musicians rather than the broadcast community. But for being like a fairly progressive, look forward, push forward, we sure like to look backwards for a lot of our gear. And that, that can be useful, but at the same time, I'd rather try and push the ball forward and make something new and build a better mousetrap, not just a copy of the old one.
Yeah, it's good to hear. And I guess the first question, well, first of all, I met you through a forum, I guess Facebook. You were doing some repairs to U87, and I sort of backtracked you, and then I found you at Vanguard. I said, I know that company. They make great stuff. And then we got to talking about my old U87 here. And what is likely to be needing repair or freshening up on my U87? I bought it in 1979, and it is in pretty good shape. But what is the most likely thing that is going to need a little tweaking or replacement? I know electrolytic capacitors tend to dry up, and that would change the sound of the mic. What would you recommend to this?
Generally, it's the electrolytic and tantalum capacitors. Newer tantalum capacitors don't fail the way the old ones did, but they all eventually, the old ones eventually do fail. They tend to fail short, which means it short circuits across rather than electrolytic capacitors tend to fail open. And because they fail short, it can do things like one of the U87s I worked on recently. I was supposed to be getting 29 volts at a particular point, and I was getting 5 volts because that shorted cap was drawing things to ground. So, that is usually one of the biggest things. The other thing I see a lot is just, it's a 50-year-old microphone. It's been used a lot. Some of them have changed hands a lot. Some of them get used in less than ideal environments, or they get left out on the stand without a cover on them. And because of that, the capsule attracts dust, it gets spit on it, it gets cigarette smoke or other kinds of smoke depending on the studio it was in. And that really does change the sound of the capsule. That increases the noise floor. You're adding mass to the diaphragm, which makes it less sensitive. So all in all, it worsens the performance of the microphone. Now, that being said, I did have a friend that sent me his U87 to get repaired. This was a long time ago. And I was like, oh yeah, the capsule's super dirty. That's why it's noisy. I cleaned it off. He's like, man, it's a lot quieter, but it sounds way different. And I liked the way it sounded better before. I'm like, yeah, that's because the capsule was, the diaphragm was like 5 times the mass of what it should be, probably because of the caked on crap that I had to carefully scrape off. So yeah, it's just, that's a big part of it is the capsule, keeping that in good condition. I mean, I can grab one if you give me a sec.
Sure, take your time.
Frame real quick, but these are some bum capsules that are just sitting on my desk, but this gold part right here, got to hold that up to the camera, is just so very fragile that it really is the beating heart of the microphone. And if this gets damaged, it really does change everything. And unfortunately, it's usually one of the most expensive parts of the microphone as well.
And a condenser is just another word for a capacitor. Mm-hmm. And that gold foil that's on there, I guess they have a way of depositing gold very thinly on there. Gold just being a good material to use, is it to have a certain sound to it? How does that particular type of condenser capsule work?
Well, gold. I have a longer form video where I do some explainer videos on our Instagram that are just 90 seconds long. If you want to learn the basics of how a condenser capsule works, how it makes the different polar patterns, things like that, how a vacuum tube amplifies a signal, so that sort of thing, because people like to know about that sort of stuff. But what you talked about, gold doesn't tarnish very easily. That's an important point. So it doesn't oxidize the way that copper or something else would if you deposited that on the Mylar instead. It's a really thin layer of plastic, usually 6 microns or less. Ours are, I believe, 3. I used to know this a lot better. But it's a very thin layer of plastic, and they deposit an even thinner layer of gold on it. In fact, I'm going to reach over here and I'm going to show you just how thin it is. This is one that is all wrinkled, as you can see. It's no good anymore. But this is just the diaphragm. You can see me through that diaphragm. You see that? Yeah, you can actually see me through the diaphragm. That's how thin the gold is on there. But it makes it conductive. Plastic isn't conductive. Gold is very, very conductive. So then that's one plate of a capacitor. And then the back plate, which is the rest of this is the other capsule, is behind it, is also conductive. And you create a charge that's on them. And when air or sound waves rather hit the front of the capsule, it vibrates the diaphragm, right? And it changes the distance between the 2 plates of the capacitor, in this case the diaphragm and the back plate. That sends a signal down the wire. It's very high impedance, and then we do a bunch of stuff with it with the circuit, and then it comes out the XLR, goes into your preamp, and that's how you're hearing me right now.
Thank you, Mr. Wizard. Appreciate that.
I tried to explain it as untechnically as possible, but that's really hard for me.
That's good. Alex, do we have any questions of folks, or do you have a question you'd like to bring in?
We have one question in the chat here, but before we get to that, one of the questions that I had for you, Derek, was about About microphone care, you touched on that a little bit about cleaning the capsule. I guess my question is, how often should somebody clean the capsule? Should they do like preventative maintenance? Should they clean it once a year, even if they think the microphone sounds good? Or is there an interval that you would recommend for cleaning?
When it sounds bad, when it gets noisy, this is an edge terminated capsule. I don't think I have one on my desk, but there's the Neumann U87 has a center terminated capsule, which means there's a screw in the middle of this diaphragm, and then there's a ring of around the gold that is non-conductive, and that prevents it from getting in touch with the backplate electronically, right? But if that gets dirty, that ring that has no gold on it, then it creates a bridge for those electrons to go over, and that's when you get noise. That's when you get like when we do what's called the breath test, and if you breathe towards the capsule like you're fogging a mirror, and if then you start to get those crackles, that's because the moisture accumulates on that dust, creates that bridge over, and then you get electrons because they want to go anywhere but the circuit. We talked about like I said high impedance. Basically, those electrons want any method of escape possible, right? And if they have a method of escape, they're going to take it, and that creates noise in our waveform in the electrical signal coming down the wire, right? So I tell people I will clean it dry with a dry brush. If I look at the capsule and it's pretty dirty, I send them photos when I do repairs, and I send them videos. I'm like, hey, here's your capsule. It's quite clean. You really don't need to clean it. I'm not going to charge you the time it takes for me to clean it because it's not worth it. A wet clean is for capsules that typically have spit residue, smoke residue, other awful things on them. But that's pretty dangerous. That layer of gold is quite thin. And even though gold doesn't oxidize very easily, it can over time, particularly the way AKG did their capsules on their breasts or on their on the ULS that you've got. I almost never wet clean those because as soon as you put the water on, that gold just wants to separate right off that mylar. And if the gold's not there and it's not conductive, that's a big problem, right? So I tell people you don't need to clean the capsule unless it's really, really dirty and affecting the sound, or it's actually causing noise problems. The breath test method is the one I recommend for people that have center terminated capsules. I'm like, listen, breathe towards your capsule gently, like you're fogging a mirror, from about 6 inches away or so. And if it starts to get all poppy and noisy or sounds like there's like the ocean in the background, that's a good sign that you need to clean the capsule or that you have a bum capsule entirely. Some capsules, for whatever reason, are just more sensitive to moisture than others. We actually test every single mic we build, and we do a breath test on it before it goes out the door as part of our testing to make sure that it's not just a capsule that's really sensitive to moisture. Because that can ruin a good vocal take. Or radio
100%.
show.
You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. So we have a question from Shoji Productions in the chat here, and he's asking, where can I get a Sheps mic repaired? You know anyone who does those?
It depends on the repair. I can do the repair. He's probably talking about a small diaphragm condenser, I suppose. As long as it's not the capsule diaphragm itself, I can usually fix them. There's other guys. If you're in Europe, Andreas Grosser's shop. Andreas is no longer with us, but he was a repair legend in the community. If you're near Nashville, Richard Land's another good one. There's Tom Onofrio in New York. There's David Brown in LA. Like, there's a mic repair guy in a lot of places like that do a lot of the work for the local studios. I just kind of do it on the side, but people seem to like the work I do, and I try and be very transparent about what I'm doing and the repair and everything, and I charge a reasonable rate. So you can always email me, Derek, D-E-R-E-K, at vanguardaudiolabs.com.
Okay.
Yep.
And another thing on the subject of microphones that are exhibiting problems, for example, like this morning I noticed, and I haven't been able to date the C414 ULS that I have, but I noticed today when I was using it that for a brief moment, for a little bit, I could hear, you know, that typical, what it sounds like when you put a cell phone too close to a speaker that doesn't have very good
digital
shielding.
interference. Yep.
Digital. So I heard that coming through, like, and as soon as I muted my mic, it went away. So it was coming from, like, this mic was picking up something. Is there anything that can be done about that, or is that just like a byproduct of whatever the design is of that mic?
Sometimes it's the design. Sometimes it's so the shell of your microphone acts like a shield, right? It's grounded. And it's usually joined with the audio ground somewhere, sometimes in many places, sometimes in only one place. And if your microphone, some microphones are more sensitive than others. Tube microphones in particular tend to be more sensitive than FET microphones or solid state microphones to external noise and electromagnetic interference, or RFI, EMI is what we call it. I'll use it for short. Electromagnetic interference or radio frequency interference, right? So what you're hearing is, in this case, EMI or RFI. And some microphones are more susceptible to it to others. Some of it's the circuit. Some of it is the way that they build the chassis. If the chassis at some point has become unbonded to the signal ground, even just a little bit, where it's a little more of a resistance, you know, you can measure it with an ohm meter in between the signal ground and the chassis ground, it becomes easier for it to pick up bad juju, you know, because there's stuff more and more. There's so much digital interference flying around our heads. I have a Wi-Fi router in the next room. My phone is up here. My computer's down here. I have a digital audio interface here. I have so much stuff flying around my head invisibly right now. And the chassis shields that. It's called a Faraday cage, if anybody wants to look it up. But that helps to shield it from those frequencies. But sometimes things can come loose. And so that Faraday cage or that chassis isn't as effective at protecting it. It could be a component going bad, but that feels like a really specific and odd circumstance. It could just be the design. Some microphones are more susceptible than others. We have one of our microphones is a little more susceptible than the other ones because it's a tube mic, and that's just the nature of it.
Yeah, I hear you. And the odd thing is that, and this is, you know, one of the frustrating things that we have to deal with as audio engineers, is that, you know,
gremlins.
These problems are really hard, especially when we can't easily reproduce them. And if you want to send a mic to somebody to repair, it's nice that if the person that is going to work on your mic can actually reproduce that problem, because how can you fix a problem that you can't reproduce, right? Like with that problem that I just described this morning, I'm not getting it now on the show right now, but it only happened this once this morning. So it's like, what are you can't do anything about that, right?
And here's the other thing, right? It's a signal chain. So it could have been the mic. It could be that your cable, the shield, is becoming unbonded to the signal ground, and that's part of it. It could be somewhere in the mic preamp or down the line somewhere else. So I always ask people for an audio sample. Always, 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 particularly with intermittent problems. I say, give me an audio sample. If you can give me a video too of like what's, you know, maybe you're tapping it and that's what's causing it. Maybe it's when you're near your computer or whatever the case may be. The intermittent ones and the location dependent ones are so hard to solve. I had one that it was his neighbor's air conditioning unit that was turning on and kicking dirty electricity back into the system. And he lived in an apartment. There's not much he can do about that. Hard to, you know, put an isolation transformer on your own box when you live in an apartment, and it's just like you live with it, you know?
Yeah, Derek even asked me if I leave my Neumann on to turn it off, because when you electrify the microphone, the capsule starts to collect dust and things like that. And my answer was, I don't know. I've had it hooked up to phantom power for about 50 years. It should be the size of a bowling ball by now. But apparently my air is relatively clean in here. But it's strange environmental things, Alex, that can affect your microphone. And if you got golden ears for it, you're going to hear all kinds of weird little things. Like as a voiceover guy and as a radio disc jockey in the past, I was very sensitive to how my mic sounded, and I knew how to work it like an instrument. And when things weren't quite right, I could tell right away when something was wrong because my ears are just attuned to it. And I think if you're an audio expert like you are, both of you guys, you tend to be able to hear it. It's like distortion is something that you have to train yourself to listen for. Most people just would pass it up and say, I don't know what that is, so I'm not listening for it. But once you mention it and once you know what to listen for, you're very sensitive to it. So it's like MP3s. You know, most people say, oh, the MP3 sounds fine. Well, to me, it drives me nuts. They hear all that sibilance and cutoff and harmonics and, you know, nuances to the music that is being absolutely destroyed and eliminated. Most people, that's good enough. That's fine.
Yeah.
So if you're into the microphone, your ears are definitely attuned to it.
That's an excellent point, Mitch. I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the things is I think more people need to do is tune their ears, train their ears, learn how to pinpoint problems. Like one of the issues that I had recently, I'm on a new console now. I switched to a Yamaha DM3, but I had a Soundcraft digital mixer before, and 3 of the channels were exhibiting subtle, and I mean really subtle distortion, and they weren't over modulating. Like the levels were, the gain stage was fine, but those 3 channels really subtle harmonic distortion. And then I unplugged the mic, plugged it into a different channel, didn't have that problem. So it's like, but the average person, just starting out learning how to record at home might not notice that, right? Because it's not harsh digital clipping. It's like this subtle overdriven sound of like component failure on that channel of that preamp, right? And I'm sure Derek can probably relate to when things slowly, not complete failure, that's the frustrating thing, is when things capacitors start to fall out of spec, and it's like, something isn't quite right. It doesn't sound like what it did when you first got it, right? So something is wrong.
Yeah, and that may not even be a component failure. That could be like a derating drift over time. Like for instance, I know, Mitch, we talked about on your U87, I will check the bias of the transistor, because if that transistor is not biased properly, it will distort more easily, particularly at high levels. It just is what it is, right? So
everything about me is high levels, so just so you know.
There you go.
Yeah,
it could be component drift. It could be that a trim potentiometer through something through shipping or through temperature changes has drifted as well, and you just need to adjust the potentiometer, and that would be it internally. But that takes specialized equipment and the know-how, and usually, fortunately for a lot of old microphones, the schematic makes it a lot easier to work on a mic when I already have the schematic and I know what's going on. And Neumann's really helpful. They put the voltages, what they should be in particular places. They have test jacks on their U87, so you can plug in a signal generator right into that test jack. You don't need to clip it in somewhere else. Neumann was very, very
They
good
don't make
about
that publicly available, though, right? You have to chase companies to try to get this documentation.
No, the Neumann stuff is all very... I don't know how publicly available it is, but like their old manual for that microphone had the schematic in it. And then on the transformer, there's a label and it says schematic diagram 4, which means it's revision 4 or whatever, right? So you go find that schematic. And there's DIY communities, like Group DIY is one that I post on pretty regularly. And if you don't have the schematic, you reach out and somebody goes, yeah, here it is. And they have this huge repository of schematics in their technical documents section. I've contributed to that as well. But it's just really helpful to have schematics to work on the mic, because and the voltages, the proper spec voltages of certain things. So it depends on the company. Not all companies provide them, particularly new companies. The nice thing about those clone microphones is that if they're an actual clone, you have the schematic somewhere. You just got to figure out which version of the U47 or U87 or whatever they were using. So
it's more than likely made out of Chinesium if it's under $100 for a Neumann knockoff.
Most stuff is, most of the stuff. But, I will say this. China's gotten so much better at capsules than they were 20 years ago when I started working on microphones from China. The capsule quality out of China is way better than it was. This is a Chinese I'm talking into a Chinese capsule right now. We do use a Chinese-made capsule, although it's to our spec. We've customized it. We've changed some things about it. So it is, you can get really great capsules out of China now. I will say that. Yeah.
Mark, do we have any questions coming in via Mukana?
We do. So here's one it's Shoji asked a very similar question. This one's from Susan. Are there any emerging technologies or innovations in microphone design that you believe will revolutionize how we capture and process sound in the future?
Well, there's one I can't talk about that we're working on. I can't tell you much about it, except that it uses an entirely novel transducer. So, right, a condenser capsule is a transducer. For your RE20, Mark, you're using a dynamic capsule, right? There's ribbons, there's carbon microphones we talked about before the show. Me and Mitch were riffing on old mics. There's this one, which is a crystal microphone that uses an old piezoelectric salt from the 1930s.
Look at that. That's so cool.
Shure Brothers 701A. But there's all sorts of ways to take the sound vibrations and create an analog electrical signal. You need something called a transducer. It's just taking one form of energy, putting it into another form of energy, right? So we're working on a new transducer type that we believe will be really amazing if I can do it right and do it well. But then there's also, I think the digital side of things is, and for me that's scary because I'm an analog guy, but the digital, the microphones that have digital modeling have gotten better and better. Just like the guitar amps that have digital modeling, the Kempers and all those guys got really, really good in a very short amount of time. I still think that the digital modeling ones, particularly with off-axis situations where you're talking not in a direct line to the microphone, they can get kind of screwy, especially the cheaper ones, which are unfortunately more popular. I think Townsend does a great job with their digital modeling. It's probably the best one on the market. And so having in theory, a plethora of microphones at your fingertips using just one physical microphone is quite revolutionary. That being said, there are things about it for musicians that we find frustrating, but for broadcast, those things are pretty cool. And I say this as a guy who makes analog microphones, right? Like, it's against my interest to say this, but I still think they're pretty impressive.
And you
And
know,
they're going to get better.
there is a microphone for everybody. It's like buying a car. There's not just one. It's not everybody's going to use a U87. Somebody might sound perfectly fine on an RE20 versus a U87 or a condenser versus a dynamic mic or even a ribbon microphone if you go back that far. So it's very interesting to make those comparisons. For me, I fell to the peer pressure, like U87 is the best it could get in 1979. There were a lot less choices of mics. So I went there, and it became my partner, my pal. I'm an original owner, and I love the mic to death, and I know how to work it. And I use a 414 right here because it's a close cousin. It doesn't sound as good, but for a Zoom call, for doing what we're doing right now, it contains my voice, my big radio voice. Mark, got any other questions for us?
We do. So here's one. What are the most common mistakes people make when selecting or using microphones? And what advice would you give to ensure that they get the best sound quality?
Yeah, I think there's two. I'm gonna say one general, like very specific mistake, and one more kind of philosophical mistake. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Did we lose me? Okay, you gave me.
I was drinking. Sorry, on camera. I'm not allowed to do that.
Gotcha. Okay. So the first mistake I tell people is use a pop filter. Like if you're getting up close to the mic, like one. Plosives, like the P in plosive is a great example. If you put your hand up in front of your mouth while you talk, you can feel the air coming off of that. And when that hits that capsule, it will push it back. It'll push this diaphragm back. And sometimes it can even make contact with the back plate and create a huge noise. And that's bad, obviously, right? But so I say pop filter is a common one I see. From the philosophical perspective, with microphones, I'm also a fly fisherman, and they have two things in common, which is people are obsessed with gear, sometimes so much that they forget that like they should be doing the actual fishing, right? So with microphones, it's the same. People get really obsessed with gear as musicians. As for radio and broadcast, I don't know how it is, but with musicians, it's really bad. They have an acronym for it called GAS, Gear Acquisition Syndrome. So you tell people you have gas. It's a very common expression. A lot of the times, the microphone you have will probably do the job pretty well. I tell people with music, the performance is going to matter so much more than the engineering most of the time. A good performance cannot be ruined by mediocre engineering, and a mediocre performance cannot be saved by incredible engineering, in my opinion, at least. This is one man's opinion. So just be careful on the gear side of things. Like select a microphone that works well for the job for a lot of other people. Maybe go in and test microphones and hear them on your voice, because different microphones are going to sound different on different people. We all have different timbres. That's how I know that Mitch or Mark or Alex is talking. That's how you know that I'm talking, because I sound like Daffy Duck with a head cold most of the time. Exactly. So I would say just... You can get really into the gear, but remember that what you are saying on the radio or on a podcast will mean so much more than the mic you're saying it into most of the time. And once again, I say this as a microphone manufacturer. I should be telling you that the microphone is the single most important thing. As long as you don't have crazy noise or like S's that take people's head off through their cheap tinny little earbuds like the ones I use when I'm mowing the lawn or working on something, as long as there's not massive problems, for the most part, it's gonna be fine. Like if you get 90% of the way there, it's really easy to get that 90%. It's the other 10% that tends to cost a lot of money and time. And yeah, it can be a worthy pursuit for particular things, but I was just telling them before the show, I am using a $150 interface to do this interview, not because it's the best interface around, but because I tend to blow up interfaces and turn them into doorstops when I'm working with high voltages and testing microphones. So I don't want to buy expensive interfaces because I have 3 sitting in my closet right now that do not work. So, I use a cheap interface for that reason. You want to think about the job the tool is supposed to do. Don't get a sledgehammer when a ball peen hammer is going to do the trick.
You can also throw a lot of money at stuff. Like I say, I do voiceover work on the side. Yeah, I got my U87. That's fine. But because I'm a radio guy, I always wanted something in front of that microphone or behind that microphone, a good preamp and a little bit of processing just to give it a little sprinkle of pixie dust. To enhance the voice, because your voice wants to cut a little bit. My voice has a little bit of that radio cut to it, so I have to enhance those 3 to 4K frequencies. That's why this little 414 with a bump in it sounds really nice for my voice. But everybody, it's going to be a little bit different. But the idea of a preamp or some kind of processing, radio people take that to the nth degree. They go way too far with it. And I'm sorry, I'm a radio guy, and I've got to have my old Symmetrix 528E. Thank you, Alex, for that. I blew up one of those, and Alex replaced it. But for my voiceover work, I went to my friends at Sweetwater. Jimmy, how you doing, buddy? And I said, look, I want the very best preamp I can get. At that point, I was willing to spend anything. And I said the most important bad words to say to any rep at a selling stuff. I said, I don't care what it costs. I want the very best. And so my Neumann is plugged into a 8801 Neve, AMS Neve preamp. So it's got a lovely preamp on it. It does a little processing. It's still analog, but it's digitally controlled. I think that's the secret to a lot of stuff. Our brain still processes analog. And I think it brings a little bit to the party. Preamps, especially ones that have Rupert Neve's magic goodness in there. Maybe it's the transformers, the way they wind the transformers, their Jensens versus something else. That's part of the decision. You're painting with a palette here a little bit. So your microphone does one thing, the processing does something else. Do you feel that there needs to be a pairing like with wines with microphones? So you're going to use a big condenser, then you need this type of processor or a preamp to go with it, or should you just plug it right into the amp with a 1/4-inch plug?
There are certainly objective things that you need to do. Like you just said, don't plug your condenser into a guitar amp with a 1/4-inch plug. 1, because you often need phantom power, and guitar amps generally don't provide that. But 2, there's a whole impedance thing. But, there are people that plug mics into guitar amps for an effect, get that distorted sound on the voice. Ribbon mics tend to need more gain. That's another objective one. And they have funny impedance curves as well. So that's a whole other nerd discussion. But, I am of the opinion, once again, it's not the arrow, it's the archer, and you hit the nail on the head. There's so much subjective things, like why do we like the way things sound? I don't know how many people in your audience have ever heard a dry electric guitar signal, but it sounds terrible. If it's not going through an amp, if you plug it directly into a direct box, it sounds miserable. It's the fact that we selectively destroy it with a tube amp. That's what makes that cutting slash solo or the edge on U2 or whatever sound so good to our ears, even though it is objectively, we've annihilated that signal beyond what it originally was to where it's not even recognizable. Microphones do the same thing to a more subtle degree, but I think of microphones kind of like paintbrushes. Like, you ever watch Bob Ross? He's got the liner brush and the 2-inch brush and the fan brush, and those all do different things. He doesn't paint his happy little clouds with the liner brush, and he doesn't paint his happy little trees with the 2-inch. Actually, sometimes he does. But my point being, different tools do different jobs. You're not going to go try and use your socket wrench to screw in a Phillips screw, because it's just not going to work that well. I'm jumping all over with analogies here, but hopefully you get the idea, and that they're tools, and tools are designed to do slightly different things or radically different things. And understanding your tools, their limitations, what they excel at is really important. And a lot of that's just listening, because subjectively, we like things. Alex is using a 414 ULS, which is like one of the more like flat, what you put in is what you put out type of microphones. But if you record an entire record with that, a musical record, and you're not adding a bunch of colorful processing, you're going to get a record that sounds like vanilla cake with mayonnaise frosting, because it's just kind of a boring sounding microphone. And there's nothing wrong with that for specific tasks. But typically, the mics you spend a lot of money on are the vocal mics, because the vocal's up front. It's right here. You want it to have those lovely qualities of slight harmonic distortion, of maybe peaks and dips through the frequency response, different transient responses. And those are the things that kind of make the magic, right? So that magic, sometimes it's hard to find. You
hear stories of Quincy Jones recording Michael Jackson with SM57, which is a mid-level priced Shure microphone, a dynamic mic. And you wouldn't think, well, if money's no object, why would they pick such an inexpensive $50 microphone? Well, it's giving them the sound they want.
SM7B.
SM7B, yeah.
It was an SM7B, not a 57.
But the point stands. It's an inexpensive dynamic mic when Quincy probably had $20,000 microphones in the locker he could have used, you know?
And why is it that the older stuff sounds so much better? Old analog vintage gear is one. I mean, you told me what this thing is worth. You know, it's great. I'm glad it's worth a lot more than I paid for it. But why does that happen? Why is it a collectible?
I have a theory on it. I talked about the technology of the time, how their technology was just not as good back then to make the sounds they wanted to make. So things were colored because they had no other choice. The sounds were colored. And when I say colored, I mean they had specific frequency domains that sounded, were hotter or colder than other ones. They might have had more or less harmonic distortion. That's what I mean when I say colored, musically colored for people who may not be in the musician domain, but in the broadcast domain. But because of that, I think they use their ears a lot more when they design these things. I think if you're looking at frequency response graphs, you're shopping or designing a microphone wrong. The way we test our microphones is I will build 4 prototypes of a microphone, right? For instance, this is just a for instance. I will take one component of, the couple dozen components in the microphone, and I will have 4 different variations of that component. And then we'll take it into a real studio, and we will put it on a real recording session against the best mics they have to offer. And then we listen very carefully on critical listening systems. We go, what do we like about this one? What do we like about their mics that we can try and integrate into our mic musically? Like what makes it sound so good? And we try and pinpoint that, and then we try and integrate that into our mic. And you wash, rinse, repeat a couple dozen times, and if you get 2% better a dozen times, that's some good compound interest, And a lot of the times the changes we're making, you're talking 20 cents on the bill of materials, or maybe we might even, the component we like might cost less, like that SM7B for Michael Jackson. But I think that those guys use their ears a lot more. And because technically they couldn't achieve like a perfectly ruler flat mic, which like we talked about can sound kind of boring, they were more interested in making it sound musical at times. And I think that's something that some microphone designers, because they're such science geeks about it, which isn't bad. You want low noise floor. You want certain things to objective specifications to be good. But there's the subjective part of it that I think gets skipped over a lot. And that's why do we like the way it sounds?
I 100% agree with that, because this is a question that I get a lot as well. And people they fixate on frequency response charts, which in my eyes they're rather meaningless. In fact, I came across something that actually I found really amusing. Was I was looking at Manly Microphones website, and they have an FAQ that says why doesn't Manly post a frequency response chart for microphones? And their response was because we feel that it's not that oftentimes, you got to use your ears, and there are a lot of companies that post frequency response charts, and that those response charts are just made up. It's literally someone drawing a line in the factory in China, and it's utterly meaningless. Plus, you need an anechoic chamber, and you do all the measurements. But you're absolutely right. There's more to it than just a chart. It's the sum of a lot of different things.
There's
Can you hear that
there's
interference, by the way?
yeah. Yes, I do. Is that you or is that me?
That's my mic.
Okay. Well, it came back. You know, I think I found a new customer by being on this show. That's fantastic. Or it could be, what was that? The Borg? I don't know.
That's the
Transformers.
Okay, Transformers. There
His
you go.
mic's going to
Perfect.
turn into a thing and start spiking him.
Awesome. I will take your story one further, and I'm not trying to top you because you're 100% correct. You can go on Audeze website, Audeze, A-U-D-E-Z-E. They make headphones, not microphones. But it's a similar measurement procedure, just kind of the other way around. And they wrote this fantastic article. They have two very expensive measurement systems that are made by different companies. And they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to test the exact same pair of headphones on the two different measurement systems. And there are massive differences in the frequency response, not because the headphones are any different, but because the measurement system, even after calibration, reads it differently. You're talking like 6 decibel differences in between those charts in some levels, right?
That's massive.
Yeah, 6 decibels is like twice as loud, to give people a perspective, or twice as quiet if you go the other direction. So unless those measurements are being done on the exact same machine, in the exact same environment, sometimes even at the exact same time, because humidity and air pressure and things like that can affect how sound travels, those measurements, you're comparing chalk and cheese. I won't even say apples and oranges because those are both fruits, right? You're just comparing two entirely different things. So I tell people the only frequency response charts that I use to kind of tell me what my ears are already hearing, because we don't listen with our eyes, we listen with our ears, is I go to a place called Audio Test Kitchen, and they did what I described. They took a bunch of microphones from a bunch of different manufacturers, used the exact same system on all of them, and they, most importantly, they didn't over smooth the charts, because a lot of the times you'll see 1 octave smoothing on these charts, which makes them almost completely useless in my estimation. More useless than they already were. And they're doing 1/10 of an octave smoothing, which means the chart looks a lot more ripply. And you can go, hilariously, you can go to these mics and you can grab that chart and then you can compare it to the manufacturer's chart. And it's like looking at two entirely different, you wouldn't even think they're the same microphone. But because Audio Test Kitchen did them all at the same time on the same system and they didn't over smooth it, those can be useful for telling you with your eyes what your ears have already heard. But I say use your ears first, man. Like always, we listen with our ears.
It's like the controversy of analog, like people like vinyl or recordings on half-inch tape or quarter-inch tape or 2-inch tape, is that those mediums use their own processes to add certain things that are very subtle to the output that you're listening for. You're so used to hearing a record for so long. There's a certain thing going on there that the record introduces, but it's so musical, like even order harmonics. Alex and I have had many discussions of why we love Rupert Neve devices, because he knows how to saturate a transformer to get those harmonics out of it. You can't put that on a spec sheet. So you just so you have a little button that says warmth or some other whoomp or boss sound or whatever. So you hit it. So it's very hard sometimes to quantify what it is that makes a certain processor or microphone or combination thereof sound the way they do. So it's very interesting.
And I just want to say, I want to emphasize this, please, people, because I know I've met people that do this. Stop shopping for microphones based on charts. Please. Please stop.
Yeah, I don't provide charts either for the same reason. Also, they're kind of expensive to get done properly, and I'm like, I'd rather use that to make more mics or cooler mics. So we don't go looking on our website. You will not find them.
I don't know when I got my AKG, it had a chart. They charted that microphone's performance, I guess, against something. I don't know what, but there was a very important looking squiggle on there. And so, that's impressive. That must be important.
It's very.
I didn't get it on my Neumann when I bought it, but there it was.
I mean, they put it in the manual, and it can be useful to a degree. Like, we know U87s tend to be sibilant on a lot of people because they have that spike kind of in like the I think it's like 5 to 7K if I remember right. And I have a chipped tooth. I'm a very sibilant talker. So U87s do not work well on me because those sibilants are just jabbing an ice pick into people's eardrums whenever they hear me. So I don't want to do that to people. You talked about even order harmonics. Do you mind if I grab something from down
please.
here right now?
Grab away.
This is a mic we just released. We like harmonics. What you were describing, I always just summarize as the French so beautifully did. It's the je ne sais quoi of the I don't know what. It is it's just something that sounds better, right? It's the je ne sais quoi of the microphone.
That is correct.
This is the power supply for our V14, which is a tube microphone. So there's two knobs on here. One is the typical one. I'm going the opposite direction. It's the pattern control. The cardioid, figure 8, Omni is 9 patterns, like a lot of tube mics. Those are very useful. This controls the voltage being supplied to the tube. So you can sag or overdrive the tube, which vastly, vastly changes the harmonic, the total harmonic distortion of the microphone. And so you can add or take away harmonic distortion. It also changes the output level, and to a degree, it changes the frequency response as well. Because it's not only is it changing the tube drive, but it's changing how hard that tube hits the transformer as well. So I believe this is the first microphone company that's ever done this. I'm rather proud of this.
I've never seen that. That's awesome.
Yeah, nobody's ever done it before, as far as I know. And we are going to try to integrate it in some other microphones in the future after I get the patent paperwork submitted.
But it must be a tube mic to make that work, right?
It is. You can do that with a FET mic, but it's not going to sound as good because tubes just have that je ne sais quoi, So,
they certainly do.
Yeah, it is a tube mic, and it's an expensive one because we make them by hand in the States. We use a Bee's Knees CK12 brass capsule made in Australia. They run like $5,000. I think they're on sale for $44 or $4,500 right now, if I remember right. Yeah,
love that name. Mark, do we have any more questions coming in from Makana?
We do. So we have a couple more here. Shoji Productions says, besides his own company, what are Derek's top 2 to 3 favorite microphone companies and why?
Oh, I've never been asked that question. That's a great question, Shoji. I like companies that do interesting things. Really, cool, push the ball forward. My friends Sammy and Shar, they do Oma World microphones, and it's a very visually based company. I'll give them a shout out. You can get different screens on the front of the microphone which affect the sound. They can paint them different colors for you, and then they have ribbon and condenser options in these microphones. They're really cool, and I just think people doing original things are very cool, and that needs to be highlighted, and they are certainly original people, so that's absolutely no shock. Another microphone company that I really like, if we're talking modern microphone companies, that's a different question. If we're talking vintage mic companies, I mean, it's hard to beat Neumann's level of care they put into their microphones. When I work on them, it's a pleasure to work on them because even though that's that classic German over-engineering, it's well-engineered. As opposed to the 414s are just tighter than a tater in a tailpipe in terms of the amount of components they cram onto those boards. And they're hard to work on. And the frame is fragile, and they didn't change it for like 60 years. So a lot of the work I do is just literally replacing the whole chassis of the 414 for people. And it takes me like 2 hours. I will say this to Neumann and AKG. Stop using flathead screws. It's the dumbest kind of screw. I hate them so much. Just stop doing it. It drives me crazy. So that's my little rant there. But anybody who uses a flathead screw, get out. We use Allen, like the hex screws in a lot of our stuff, or Phillips if we have to.
Or Torx, if you
I
if
love
you can.
Torx as well. I love Torx as well.
Derek, I opened up this ULS one time, and I just looked at the circuit board, and I said to myself, oh my God, there are so many components on this thing. It is ridiculous.
Here's its
Well,
cousin,
the
TL2.
You can't work on surface mount stuff anyhow at the component level.
You can. It's just really hard, and I try not to do it. I did work on one of the newer ones, an XLS for somebody. Those are surface mount, and I hated every minute of it. I didn't get to drink my morning coffee so that I wasn't so shaky because that surface mount stuff is so tiny. So yeah, it's not a pleasure to work on those, but I was able to fix it. It was a very odd mechanical problem, fortunately, as opposed to a component level problem. But there are people who do surface mount replacements, and I hate it. I try not to. All of our microphones for Vanguard through hole.
Got it.
All of them. Yeah.
So we've really geeked out on microphones here, and I want to do a. By the way, thank you. I mean, the je ne sais quoi was certainly very much appreciated. Just as a thought experiment, I know that Alex is very attached to his older 414. If you were to pick a microphone, like a fine wine pairing for Alex, let's just say hypothetically that whatever you suggest, Alex would buy. What would you recommend for him, knowing what he sounds like
A
and what
Vanguard
his interests
V14, 5 of them. Yeah, you can just buy 5 of our $5,000 mics. That'd be great. I would ask this of Alex, because I haven't heard Alex's voice in person. So I'd ask you, what are some mics you've used that you've really liked in the past? And that would give me a baseline.
Okay, that's a fair question. Well, yeah, the C414 ULS I very much like. The mic that I was using before, and I still have this, and it's actually a lot brighter than this one. I really like how I sound on an Electro Voice RE27, which has a neodymium magnet in it. It doesn't work on everybody because of its brighter character, but for me, to me it sounds like broadcast. It's super present. That mic is good. I do like how I sound on a Neumann U87. I think that's a good sounding microphone as well. Interestingly, like the C414, I actually have it on the hypercardioid pattern, which seems to be slightly brighter in the 3 to 4K range.
The
cardioid's a little bit flatter, but I like both. I like really smooth sounding microphones in general.
Smooth sounding. I mean, I'm going to not recommend anything from my company because that's just biased. So I'm going to try and, I could say get a Vanguard
It's
V13.
okay, especially if you supply one to them. That would be great.
Vanguard V13 is a very smooth. I'm kind of the opposite. I like something with a little bit of that top end roll off, like a original Telefunken 251. So we actually incorporated that kind of top end gentle roll off into the V13. I have a nasally voice, as we discussed, so I don't like that 1.5 to 2.5K range. I try and de-emphasize that when I design microphones, because if I want to ever use it, I don't want to sound like
Well, that's
Daffy
exactly
Duck.
right.
Yeah.
Why picking the right microphone for that individual is so absolutely crucial. People ask me all the time, "What's the best microphone?" There's no such thing.
It's only the mic for the job. Yeah.
Exactly, and people often go by price too. They'll come in to the store and they'll say, "I want an 87 because I saw so and so use the microphone," and then they try it and it doesn't really work. Or pick any microphone that their favorite artist is using. They'll buy it because of that, and it's not. Oftentimes, it's not always the best fit for them. It may be, but it may not always be.
So you said you like smooth, but you also like bright. Now, U87s tend to be peaky and bright, especially the newer ones. The older ones, like Mitch has, there's reasons, and I won't get into them, but they tend to be less bright. Interestingly, you can modify. Neumann put, in their wisdom, put a couple of components in there that help shape the sound, and you can change a couple of components and really drastically modify a U87's frequency response. Some guys have made a pretty good living just modifying U87s for people's voices, but I would say for you, have you tried an AKG C12 style mic in the past?
I have not.
They tend to be smooth, but they have a push on the top end in the way that the Telefunken 251, which is very much its close cousin, because Telefunken never actually made microphones. It was just a distributor, and so everybody else made microphones for them. And AKG made the 251. It uses the same capsule, but some different components and a slightly different circuit. And it was kind of more rolled off on the top. AKG C12 style microphone with an edge terminated capsule, they tend to be less peaky than the U87 style capsules through those really crucial sibilance ranges. So it's a fairly smooth sounding microphone, but it's got that zing on the top that it seems like you really like. I'd say try an AKG C12 style mic. Now, don't go buy an AKG C12 because they're like $20,000 on the used market, or do so.
The other thing is go somewhere
on that microphone too.
Yeah,
go somewhere, Alex, where you can try a lot of them out. Like I'm lucky to have B&H within an hour and a half's drive. You can walk into a room and you can try every expensive new microphone that's made, including Vanguard.
Mitch,
I'm sure.
I sell microphones, so I'm surrounded by microphones.
All right, so
that's
what's going on.
Not a problem for me.
Yeah, as far as clones of C12s go, the two companies I don't think Heiserman makes a C12 style mic. They make a 251, but they don't make a C12. Um, I would look at a Bee's Knees style. Bee's Knees is an Australian company. They make the capsule that's in the V14 and our V24, which is an AKG C24 style microphone with some added features. Um, I I would try Bee's Knees C12. They have a C12 style mic that might work pretty well on you. And I think Bee's Knees makes respect to Tim Campbell and OPR and the other guys that make the vintage brass AKG CK12 capsule recreations. I think Ben does a really, really fine job of it. And he's technically a competitor. I don't really care. He's a good dude and he makes great stuff. So I'm not gonna sit here and say his stuff is garbage, because it's not. It's really good, and he makes a darn good capsule. And he's a machinist. He does the capsules on his own. These aren't, as Mitch put it, Chinesium at all. They are Australium. Is that a thing? I don't know.
Why not? It's fair dinkum. It's all good stuff. Yeah. Well, maybe some more questions before we wrap up today's show. Mark, can we jump over to you and see if you have any in Bacana?
Sure. We have several more questions here. Hershey's asking, what interface are you using?
Yeah, Derek, it's
WCD. I am using a Scarlett 2i2 from Focusrite. It's the 3rd generation. I have 3 of them in the closet that are broken. And like I said, it's not because, it's not because it's a great interface. It's because if you accidentally send the wrong voltage down the line when you're probing around for the problem, and you have to be listening while you're doing it, tube mics have some serious voltage in them, and you can fry a preamp. This one, actually, the direct monitoring circuit on it no longer works. I have no idea how I did that. I'm actually going to get a different inexpensive interface. I'm going to get an Audient Evo, because I can digitally match the gains on the 2 preamps for working on microphones, which I really like.
That's a good little interface.
Yeah, Audient makes good stuff. Simon, I talked to Simon about it, and Audient's a good company.
100%.
For interfaces for musicians, I really like the Universal Audio Apollos a lot. I like the Metric Halos. Those are great. Those are also awesome interfaces. I know Antelope Audio used to have QC problems, but apparently they're past that, so that's one to definitely check out. Versatility, I think, is the name of the game with an interface, because people don't have racks and racks of outboard gear to use anymore necessarily. So the Universal Audio and Metric Halo and Antelope, they have all these plugins that you can run natively without using up computer processing power. They run it in the interface itself that can really do some cool things. So. And
money isn't necessarily the object, because, like I said, I spent a ton on the 8801 AMS Neve, and I'll say something critical about it because it sounds great, but it's very particular. Very particular. You dial in, and there's a range where it sounds great, and just a little off that range doesn't sound so great anymore.
Yeah, that stuff tends not to be linear because it's transformer based, and transformers aren't really very linear devices, So you can find that sweet spot that sounds really good at that particular SPL that you're putting out, and then a little past that or a little under that, and it can be underwhelming. And that's not I don't think that's a bug. I think that's a feature.
Okay, I'm a bug and a feature all at the same time, because I've got a loud radio voice, and you can tell I pushed that real peaky part of the voice to cut through. Mark, more questions?
We do. We got several more here. Okay. Can you discuss the various or the proper ways to store a collection of microphones?
I will say this. I store my condensers, my personal condensers, in a Ziploc bag with a desiccant packet. You can put desiccant packets in the microwave, and you can recharge them, which is to say remove the moisture that they've absorbed. Moisture is the enemy of a condenser microphone. Dust is the enemy of a condenser microphone. I do not put them in the cheap, that like Shetty foam. AKG for a while, they had the C414s in this terrible foam, and it would like melt to the diaphragm, and there was nothing I could do about it. That's the one that Mitch is holding in his hand. Desiccant packet. You get them in everything. Just save it. Look it up. You can chuck it in the microwave, and that helps take the moisture out of it, and you can reuse it. For condensers, that's how I recommend storing them. Dynamics. Most dynamics are pretty durable. The SM57 and 58 legendarily so. People use them as hammers to put stages together and then use them in the show. Dynamics you have to be less careful with. Ribbons. Ribbons, I just say don't go near them because they might explode. But jokingly, I think the same thing. It's aluminum. Aluminum can oxidize. The ribbon element is. So keeping moisture away from it, keeping dust away from it, keeping wind away from it is very important.
Can you fix a 77DX?
That's a ribbon microphone, yeah?
Yeah, I was just curious.
Is it? I mean, if it's an electronic problem, yes. If it needs to be re-ribboned, there's a guy named Cole Picks Vintage. He's in Nashville, and he's who I send people to for ribbon mic repairs. Shout out to Cole. He does incredible work. You can find him on Instagram. He has a site, Cole, C-O-L-E, Picks, like guitar picks, vintage.com. And he does phenomenal ribbon work. So I would talk to him. He actually has the original corrugators from the RCA shop. The ones that they use to corrugate the ribbon, the tools. And he has the forms for the microphone grills, the wooden block forms, so he can make them look brand new. It's incredible.
That was cool. Mark, more questions?
Yep, 2 more here. For
Okay.
someone starting a podcast or live stream, what would you recommend as the best budget-friendly microphone setup, and how can they optimize their environment for better audio quality? And you can vote Vanguard if you'd like.
I will say, actually, and I've done this before, if it's a budget, when you have a condenser mic, I'm sitting, and you can probably hear it on the broadcast, in a drywall room. It's a box. It is not ideal for audio. It's my office that I do repair work and, unfortunately, accounting and stuff like that in. So I do not recommend a condenser on a budget because you will have to spend a lot of money treating the room to prevent those reflections. And if, you get rumbles from trucks, condensers just are more sensitive, which can be a really good thing for the detail of voice, can be a terrible thing if you're by a major highway or something like that. A dynamic microphone, the RE20 is a great choice. I don't think the SM7B is a great choice because it has such low output that you have to get a device that helps it. I really like the Rodecaster package in terms of it feels very easy for people to work with. They've done a really good job designing the software of it. What is it called? The Rodecaster Pro, like the interface. And then they also have the mic as well. Although I would argue that any decent, $100 to $200 dynamic mic will probably do the job at that point. But they've designed the software in such a way that you can be, technically speaking, not very well versed in audio and, compressor settings and knee and attack and ratio and things like that. And they've done a really good job of making it so you can kind of be like an audio dummy and still do a pretty good job, or really dig all the way down deep into the settings and tweak things to your heart's content. Tom Rosenbauer, who does the Orvis fly fishing podcast, he actually asked me this same question, and he does use a Vanguard mic now because his room is treated, but he uses that Rodecaster, and we went through his settings and worked on his audio. I just did it for fun because I'm a nerd, and that Rodecaster is a pretty powerful little object. I think it's a really great product. And there's undoubtedly you guys will have better suggestions than me, so take that with a grain of salt.
Well, one grain of salt over the office hours show. A lot of people are using the Stealth microphone. Stellar microphones.
Stellar,
They're
yeah.
kind of bright sounding, got a wide range and inexpensive. So I don't know what you think of those, but I think it's a good way for people.
That's made by Tech Zone. I think they're a California company.
There you go.
I've heard of them. I don't think I've ever heard the mic, so I can't say anything about them. But if people like them and use them for broadcasts, go nuts, man. Like I said, there's tools for jobs, and the tool here is not necessarily the right tool for that job. If you do get a treated room and stuff, a lot of Vanguard V4s and V13s are in voiceover studios and podcast studios now. Scott Rummel, who is a voiceover guy, Jack Daniel, Bill and Cammy, Bill Rogers and Camille Dixon, who do all the voices for Disneyland, they use a Vanguard V13, which is pretty cool. That made me smile. I was just at Disneyland and heard Bill's voice, and I never texted him about it, and I need to. So
I used to do the voice of the monorail over at Disney
Oh,
World.
did you really? Okay.
Yeah, back in the 70s. That was ages ago. But, speaking of the guys, you just dropped a couple of names or people I recognize as voiceover people. Why did the country divide itself so much between the 416 on the West Coast and the U87s and the big condensers on the East? What started that whole process?
So the legend of Ernie Anderson, who did the Love Boat and all these things. What was that, ABC or NBC? I can't.
That was ABC. He was Mr. ABC.
Mr. ABC, got it.
The Love Boat.
Yes. So there's two different stories about why they chose the 416, which is a shotgun mic, which they like hang on the end of a stick for location sound. It has a very, very tight polar pattern. It picks things up right here and like nowhere else, right? So it's like hyper cardioid. So there's two stories about why I used it, and I don't know which one is true. Scott Rummel told me the more fun one and the one that's kind of juicier, so I'll tell you that one. The legend is that he was kind of difficult to work with. And as he got older, he became paranoid that people were talking crap about him while he was in the booth doing his VO stuff. So he demanded that he gets to sit in the control room with the engineer and the producer and whoever else so that, you know, they can't talk smack about him. And the engineer was like, I need a mic that I can still have playback on the monitors but won't cause crazy feedback or echo or anything like that. So they chose a shotgun mic, the 416. And it's incredibly sensitive to like the tiniest movements. So the happy thing about that is you can get a lot of different tones out of it. The sad thing about that is if you are doing a long read and you move a centimeter, your tone of voice is going to change over that centimeter pretty drastically. But the 416 is one that a lot of people use. I mean, the U87 is just a ubiquitous mic that works well. It doesn't require an external power supply. It's very easily serviceable and interchangeable. And I think, you know, they still use them for voiceover at Disney for a lot of their, you know, their animated movies and stuff. It's just it's a well-made mic that holds up and isn't complicated and does the job. And I think you can make it work on, I wouldn't say most voices. I don't think it's the most flat or neutral mic around, but you can make it work on quite a few voices. And when the engineer is always using those mics, he knows exactly how to tweak it for different voices. So that's my theory.
And mic technique works really well too, to know how far to lean in to get something
and
more
polar
emphasis.
Pattern changes it tremendously.
How to smile into those plosives so you don't blast them all over the place. And I have to defend Ernie Anderson just a little bit. You have to understand what's going on when a voiceover person's in a studio by themselves, and you've got the control room with the engineer, the producer, the client, and you know you get the script and you read it with your life. You give it your life. You know, the Mrs. Paul's peas are, you know, crafted with the finest ingredients from all the world, and then you finish. And you stop, and then you're looking at all these people. Nobody acknowledges you, the announcer or the voiceover person. They're all just chattering away, and eventually, you know, like I'll be like waiting to hear what was it a good take? Or do it again? Should I go again? What part should I punch up or whatever? And then I'll usually hit the button and I'll say, "What's up with that take?" And the producer will turn around and say, "Oh, it was okay." I said, "Well, thanks for telling me." Because I can see how Ernie's thinking they're talking shit about him right there.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's why you get a little paranoid when you're in the room.
Musicians have a similar experience in the studio as well.
I bet. And
One last question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
All right. Shoji Productions wants to know, where can I hear a Vanguard mic in the Los Angeles area?
Vintage King LA has them. Pro Audio LA has them. On like you can demo them. There's another one, I believe Westlake Pro, if their LA location is still around. I know COVID wasn't kind to them business wise. If Westlake Pro is there, you can listen to them there. I'm trying to think if there's any other ones. I used to know this list a lot better. Those are the three. The other one that used to be around was MicWorks, but they were in Orange, I think, and he retired. But Vintage King and Pro Audio LA are two good ones.
And Derek, do you have any? Because I don't think we can get them here. But do you have any distribution in Canada? Because I actually work for Long McQuaid, which is the biggest music retailer in Canada.
L&M,
I don't think we have access. Do you guys?
You do have access through Studio Economic, because there's two distributors pretty much. There's L&M and Francois over at SG, and those are the two. So me and Francois go back a ways with Avantone, so that's who we picked as our distributor. And you can hear them through Economic, and I believe you guys can actually sell them through Economic as well.
Very cool.
Yeah. So yeah.
He's looking for a discount.
You know, well, you can always just email me.
Friends of Derek.
this is
Francois,
one thing
this conversation didn't happen.
This is one thing we need to talk about, because one of the things I'm sensitive to on camera is overly large microphones. And so what I love the way tube microphones sound on my voice with the deep, rich, low end, but they're often, massive, and it's not the greatest look on camera. So do you make a FET-based microphone that is a little bit more compact?
I mean, all of our microphones, for the sake of economies of scale, when I designed the chassis on the Gen 2s, all of them except the V1 run in the same chassis. So they're all... This is a tube microphone. Let me see if I can pop it out here without dropping it on the floor. They're all about this size. It looks bigger when I hold it up like this, just like fishing,
That's not
right?
bad.
But yeah, it's not too bad. It's not like U47 fat, but they're all about this size. And then I work with that. So we do have a FET version. It's called the V4, and that's FET's transformerless, rather clean. And then the V13 is tube transformered. The V44S is a stereo mic that's two V4s together, you could call it. So yeah, we do have a FET version. I would recommend the V4. There's a lot of VO and podcast and broadcast guys that like the V4 a lot. And as an alternative to the U87, it does very similar things, but I think it has less problematic audio spikes to deal with, particularly in the sibilance range than modern U87s have. That's just, once again, my opinion. Take it with a grain of salt.
There you go. Well, Derek, it's so good to have you on here. And wait a minute. Looks like we got a last minute question popping in. Mark.
No, this is just for me. So is there a website people can go to see the types of microphones you have and learn more about your company?
VanguardAudioLabs.com. It's spelled like this on my shirt, audiolabs.com. And you can see all our microphones there. We have our own Shopify for the US. If you buy direct from us, I'm not going to lie, we make more money and it feeds my foster dog, so I'm very happy about that. So by all means, buy direct from our shop, but we have great dealers. If you have a great relationship with your dealer, Jimmy from Sweetwater, then talk to Jimmy from Sweetwater, although Sweetwater doesn't carry us yet for some reason. But by all means, VanguardAudioLabs.com. If you like explanations, technical, nerdy stuff like I've been chatting, our Instagram is just at Vanguard Audio Labs, and I do that as well as stupid audio memes when I get bored. And we have a Facebook page, and the usual 21st century stuff.
Well, you are truly the geek of microphones, so we're gonna anoint you as head geek of the microphone world. And the fact that I trust you with my U87, once I get these voiceover jobs out of the way so I can send it over to you for a little tender loving care. Plus, he's nearby. He's not too far away from where I am. And you know who else lives in this town? Jeff Daking. I don't know if you know Jeff from, he's an audio designer. He used to be with the Blues Magoos. He's in town and still breathing, which is always...
I did not know that.
Yeah, definitely. So great show. Just a lot of great questions, kind of a interesting subject. But think about it for a minute. Your microphone is your axe. If you're a broadcaster, a podcaster, or anybody that's getting audio, and in my opinion, my humble opinion, audio is the most important thing, because people will put up with a lot of things when they're doing a Zoom call or a podcast. They'll put up with bad video, maybe crappy lighting, things like that. But if the audio is off, that really stands out and makes it very, very hard to listen to. So it's good to have people that focus this much on it and help people make decisions, because, again, making them based truly on what it costs is not a good way to do it. Based on specs is definitely not a way to do it. You got to use your ears, and maybe the ears of a professional that understands it. Like, if you go to Alex's store, listen to his opinion, because he's got ears that are trained to tell you that this microphone's made for you. It makes you sound good. So great coverage. Appreciate, Derek, having you on. Our best to all the Vanguard people throughout the holidays. Hopefully microphones are just flying off the shelf. They probably have wings, and they're just flying right off the shelves there for you. We hope that happens.
It's a good design.
A great gift.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys having me on. Let me just nerd out on microphones. Hopefully your audience didn't get bored to tears with me talking about capacitors and charge and coulombs and all that stuff. So
Well,
it's
like
passion.
Everyone enjoyed it.
Yeah, we respect passion in anything, and if you have a passion for microphones, I'm glad we discovered each other. And I didn't know about some of the things that you mentioned, and that passion comes through, and we'd love to be able to present that. So I hope a lot of other people find that out. Also, I want to thank Mark Giuliani for helping out with Mukana. Mark will be on next week for our Christmas special, along with his chief engineer Walt Palmer, who will be our Santa Claus chief engineer. So expect Mark and Walter to be on our next program. We're going to dig really deep into independent radio stations and what it's like to run one with its hyper-local. So thanks, Mark, for being on. We'll see you next week. And, of course, always my producer friend and the go-to guy for all things tech, Mr. Alexander Knight. Alex, good to have you here. How do people reach out to us?
Yeah, there's multiple ways they can reach out to us. They can reach out to us on Discord. Our Discord server is the best way to do that. And you can scan the QR code that you'll see up on the screen here. That'll let you into our community, and we can continue the conversation after this show is done each and every single day. Of course, you can find the podcast you can find the show as an audio podcast on all platforms. We're available on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google, Spotify, all those platforms. And of course, on YouTube, if you prefer to see our mugs on camera, you can do that as well. You can reach out to us by email at hello@thelastangrydj.com as well. And we're on social media if you feel like hitting us up there.
Thanks, Alex. Always have the best in the business here, and we've got certainly a great show. We thank you for show number 42, where we talk about the ultimate questions of life, liberty, happiness, the universe, and microphones. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.